For 27 years, a small Tennessee town carried a question too heavy to answer. In 1997, a mother and son were attacked in their home. One survived long enough to bury the other, then faded beneath the weight of trauma. The case went cold. The files grew dusty. The neighborhood moved on, but the silence never felt right. Detectives came and went, each inheriting a puzzle with missing pieces. Then, in 2023, science reached backward through time. DNA that once whispered began to speak. A family tree emerged from data. A name surfaced from memory. And in 2024, the truth finally arrived, not with triumph, but with a gunshot that ended everything before justice could begin. The killer had lived freely for decades, hidden behind normalcy. When officers came to his door, he chose silence over accountability. How does a community heal when answers arrive too late? Before we get into the story, drop a comment with your country and the time right now. The evening settles over Kingsport, Tennessee, like a warm blanket pulled across the Appalachian foothills. September air hums with crickets, and the distant murmur of television sets through open windows. Mary Hutson stands at her kitchen sink, washing dinner plates as golden light streams through checkered curtains. Her hands move with the ease of routine rinse, scrub, stack. The radio plays softly, some country ballad about roads and regret. In the next room, James sits cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by computer parts and tangled cables. 17 years old, lanky and earnest, he mutters to himself as he connects motherboard to power supply. His room is a museum of teenage ambition, band posters, textbooks, circuit diagrams taped to the wall. He dreams of working in technology, building systems that connect people across invisible distances. Mary glances at the clock. 9 o'clock. The neighborhood quiets as porch lights flicker on one by one. She dries her hands on a dish towel and calls to James that she's heading to bed soon. He mumbles acknowledgement without looking up, too absorbed in his project. She smiles. This is their rhythm, predictable, safe, ordinary. Outside, a car passes slowly down the street. Its headlights sweep across the Hutson mailbox before continuing into the dark. The crickets pause, then resume. The night holds its breath. By midnight, the peace of Kingsport was gone. A neighbor named Mrs. Kellerman wakes early on September 6th, troubled by a feeling she cannot name. She has lived 3 houses down from the Hutsons for a decade, and Mary always waves when she retrieves her morning paper. But today, the Hutson driveway remains empty. The curtains stay drawn. The house sits too still. By mid-morning, worry hardens into action. Mrs. Kellerman calls the police. 2 officers arrive within minutes, their patrol car rolling quietly to the curb. They knock. No answer. They circle the property, peering through windows. 1 officer radios for backup. The door is locked from the inside. No signs of forced entry. They announce themselves and push through. What they find transforms the house into a crime scene. Mary lies in her bedroom, barely conscious, her face swollen and bruised beyond recognition. Blood pools beneath her. In the hallway, James is lifeless, his body sprawled near the staircase. A single stab wound to the chest. Rain begins to fall outside as emergency lights bathe the small home in red and blue. Paramedics rush Mary to Holston Valley Medical Center. She survives the night, but barely. Detectives arrive as the sun rises, their notepads already filling with questions that have no answers. The house tells a story written in violence, overturned furniture, blood smears on the walls, a kitchen knife missing from the block. Evidence collectors move through the rooms like archaeologists. They photograph everything. Blood samples are swabbed and catalogued. Partial fingerprints lift from the door frame. Unknown male DNA clings to Mary's clothing, preserved but undeveloped, waiting for technology that does not yet exist. At dawn, Detective Ray Collins stands in the driveway, staring at the house. He has worked homicides for 12 years, but this one feels different. The brutality exceeds logic. Nothing stolen, no forced entry. This was personal. Kingsport wakes to headlines splashed across the local paper. Teen murder. Mother critical police seek answers. Neighbors gather in clusters, whispering theories. Fear mixes with speculation. Who could do this? Why here? Why them? At dawn, detectives begin the longest case of their careers. The investigation unfolds with the urgency of a town demanding answers. Detective Collins and his team fan out across Kingsport, interviewing co-workers, classmates, family friends. They map James's social circle. Quiet kid, no enemies, spent most evenings at home. They trace Mary's work history, devoted employee at a local textile plant, well-liked, no known disputes. The evidence paints a portrait of randomness that feels wrong. No signs of forced entry suggest the attacker was familiar with the home. Shoe prints near the back door measure size 11, pressed deep into mud. The knife wound pattern matches a household blade, likely taken from the kitchen itself. Investigators theorize someone Mary knew, someone she might have trusted enough to open the door for. But the list of possibilities stretches too long. Dozens of interviews yield nothing concrete. A delivery driver remembers dropping a package that afternoon. A former co-worker mentions Mary seemed distracted lately, but offers no specifics. James's computer teacher recalls him as diligent and polite. Every lead evaporates before it solidifies. The DNA found on Mary's clothing becomes the case's silent anchor. In 1997, genetic analysis remains limited. The sample is preserved, logged, stored. Detectives hope that someday, somehow, it will speak. Town gossip spreads like wildfire. Some whisper about an ex-boyfriend Mary never mentioned. Others point to transient workers passing through the area. Suspicion fractures the community's sense of safety. Parents walk their children to the bus stop. Doors that once stayed unlocked now bolt shut at dusk. Detective Collins returns to the crime scene repeatedly, walking through the rooms, trying to see what he missed. He studies the layout, the living room where Mary was attacked, the hallway where James fell. He imagines the sequence, the knock, the entry, the explosion of violence. But the picture remains incomplete. Days turn into weeks, and the case grows colder. Mary regains consciousness in the hospital 3 days after the attack. Her face is a landscape of bruises, her memory fractured by trauma. Detective Collins sits beside her bed, speaking softly, giving her time. She tries to remember, but the images come in shards, blurred faces, heavy breathing, the scent of aftershave. She recalls a voice, deep and rough. She remembers fear more than details. The attacker moved through her house, as if he knew the layout. He called her by name, but when pressed for description, Mary's eyes fill with tears. The trauma has locked the specifics behind walls of shock. A sketch artist produces a composite based on Mary's fragmented recollections. The drawing circulates through Kingsport generic features, no distinguishing marks. It could be anyone, it matches no one. The community rallies around Mary with the fierce tenderness of small-town solidarity. Church groups organize fundraisers for medical costs. Neighbors leave casseroles on her hospital room table. Grief unites them, but answers remain absent. Mary leaves the hospital in October, moving temporarily to her sister Clara's house across town. She cannot bear the thought of returning to her own home, the place where her son died, where her life shattered. The house sits empty, yellow crime scene tape still, fluttering in the autumn wind. By winter, Mary moves away entirely, relocating to a quiet town in North Carolina. She tells Clara she needs distance from the memories. Detective Collins understands. He visits her before she leaves, promising he will not forget. She nods, her eyes hollow. Mary's departure feels like the case closing itself. The investigation continues, but momentum fades. Without the survivor nearby, without new evidence, the files begin their slow migration toward the archives. By winter, Mary moved away, unable to bear the sight of the house. Mary's health deteriorates through 1998. Depression settles over her like a fog that never lifts. She stops eating, she stops sleeping. The assault and the loss of James become twin weights she cannot carry. Clara tries to help, but grief has its own gravity. In August 1998, Mary Hutson dies. The official cause is listed as complications from her injuries, but everyone who knew her understands the truth. She died from a broken heart, from living with unanswered questions. Detective Collins attends the funeral. He stands at the back of the chapel, watching as 2 caskets now occupy the Hutson plot in the cemetery. Mother and son, reunited in death. He makes a silent vow. This case will not die with them, but vows do not solve crimes. The investigation enters the bureaucratic purgatory reserved for unsolved violent cases. The DNA profile remains viable despite degradation, stored in an evidence locker with dozens of other mysteries. Detectives come and go, each inheriting the file, each revisiting the same dead ends. The local paper runs a memorial piece on the anniversary. 2 graves, 1 mystery. The headline captures the town's frustration. Kingsport moves on because it must, but the Hutson case becomes a ghost story told in whispers, a reminder that sometimes evil escapes. Detective Collins keeps a copy of the case file in his desk drawer. He reviews it during slow weeks, hoping fresh eyes might catch what was missed. But the evidence yields nothing new. The DNA sits dormant, waiting for science to catch up. Years pass. New officers inherit the ghosts. The 2000s pass in slow rotation. The Hutson file moves from one detective's desk to another, a rite of passage for Sullivan County investigators. Each one reads the reports, studies the crime scene photos, interviews the remaining witnesses. Each one adds notes to the margins, small observations that lead nowhere. In 2003, DNA technology advances enough to submit samples to CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, a national database of genetic profiles from convicted offenders. Detective Collins personally delivers the Hutson evidence to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation lab. He watches technicians process the sample, praying for a match. The search comes back negative. No connection. The killer has never been arrested, never had his DNA collected. The system cannot find what it does not hold. In 2007, a latent fingerprint from the crime scene undergoes re-examination. New imaging techniques reveal details invisible to 1990s technology. The print is clear, distinct, unquestionably from the attacker, but it matches no database record. Another dead end. Forensic databases grow through the decade, populated by millions of profiles. Periodically, the Hutson case is resubmitted, cross-referenced against new entries. Each time, nothing. The killer remains invisible. The case becomes local folklore, retold with frustration at community meetings and coffee shops. Old-timers remember the night the Hutsons were attacked. Newcomers hear the story as a cautionary tale about the limits of justice. By 2010, the case file had thickened, but not progressed. 23 detectives had touched it. None had solved it. The evidence remained pristine, the truth remained hidden, and the gap between the two felt insurmountable. The 2010s bring whispers of hope carried on the wind of technological revolution. Detective Collins, now graying and nearing retirement, hears about breakthroughs in forensic genetic genealogy. Investigators in California use ancestry databases to identify the Golden State Killer. The method is elegant: upload crime scene DNA to public genealogy sites, find distant relatives, build family trees backward until a name emerges. Collins attends a conference in Nashville where researchers from Othram Labs present their work. They explain whole genome sequencing, how degraded samples once considered useless can now yield complete genetic profiles. They show case studies, decades-old evidence transformed into actionable leads. He returns to Sullivan County energized. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation forms a new cold case division in 2018, funded by federal grants specifically targeting unsolved violent crimes. The Hutson file becomes a candidate for review. Public fascination with cold cases rises. True crime podcasts dissect famous investigations. Television shows dramatize forensic breakthroughs. The cultural moment creates pressure and opportunity, communities demand answers, and technology finally offers a path. Collins submits a formal request to reopen the Hutson case. He writes a detailed brief outlining the preserved evidence, the viable DNA, the community impact. He argues that Mary and James deserve this final effort. In April 2023, Sheriff Jeff Cassidy approves the request. The Hutson file is pulled from storage, once more thicker now, dust-covered, heavy with accumulated years. The evidence is transported to Othram Labs in Texas. Dr. Elena Ruiz, a geneticist specializing in forensic genealogy, receives the package. She handles the vials carefully, aware she is holding the last chance for justice. In 2023, the Hutson file was pulled once more from storage. Dr. Ruiz works in a laboratory where science and patients intersect. She extracts DNA from the 1997 sample, a process requiring precision and care. The genetic material has degraded over 2 decades, fragmented by time and storage conditions. But Othram's technology excels at reconstructing incomplete puzzles. Whole genome sequencing begins. Machines hum quietly, reading millions of genetic markers, translating molecular structure into digital data. Weeks pass. Ruiz monitors progress, watching as the profile takes shape, a complete genetic signature of the unknown male who attacked Mary and killed James. With the profile complete, the genealogical search begins. Ruiz uploads the data to GEDedmatch, a public database where amateur genealogists share their DNA for ancestral research. The system compares the crime scene profile against thousands of users, searching for shared genetic segments that indicate familial relationships. Early results appear distant relatives, third and fourth cousins, scattered across North Carolina and Virginia. Ruiz begins constructing family trees, cross-referencing names with public records, obituaries, census data. Each branch represents generations, each leaf a potential connection to the killer. The Sullivan County Sheriff's Office issues a press release. New DNA testing underway in 1997. Double homicide case. Kingsport residents watch with cautious optimism. Online forums light up with speculation. True crime enthusiasts dissect the limited details, debating theories. Detective Collins, now retired but still invested, calls Ruiz weekly for updates. She tells him the process is slow but promising. The family tree is taking shape. Names are emerging. Months later, a family tree began to take shape. January 2024. Dr. Ruiz sits in her office, surrounded by genealogical charts that resemble complex spider webs. Each line connects a person, a generation, a possibility. She cross-references ancestry trees with obituaries, marriage records, property deeds. The data converges slowly, methodically, toward one branch. A relative's uploaded GE dead match data provides the key connection: a second cousin who shares significant genetic markers with the crime scene profile. Ruiz traces the lineage backward, identifying common ancestors from the early 1900s, then forward, following the descendants until modern names appear. One name surfaces repeatedly: Robinson. A family rooted in eastern Tennessee, with branches spreading through Kingsport and surrounding counties. Ruiz contacts the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. Forensic analyst Dana Wells joins the case, bringing expertise in digital cross-referencing. Together, they narrow the pool of potential suspects: age, location, proximity to the Hutson home in 1997. Each filter reduces the list. By February, they focus on George Robinson. He lived in Kingsport during the 1990s. Employment records place him working at a warehouse 3 miles from the Hutson residence. He fits the age range. He has no criminal record, which explains the absence of DNA in CODIS. Online sleuths, following the public announcements, begin their own investigations. Forums buzz with speculation. Some users claim to remember Robinson from the neighborhood. Others caution against premature conclusions. Detective Collins receives a call from Dana Wells. She speaks carefully, aware that hope can be cruel. "We have a candidate," she says. "George Robinson. We need confirmation." Sheriff Cassidy authorizes the next step. The investigation enters its most delicate phase. By spring, a name emerged from the data. April 2024. Investigators trace George Robinson's history with the thoroughness of archaeologists excavating a buried life. They pull employment records, tax documents, vehicle registrations. The portrait that emerges is unremarkable. A man who worked blue-collar jobs, kept to himself, left no significant footprint. Robinson worked at a distribution center in Kingsport from 1995 to 1999. The warehouse sat less than 3 miles from the Hutson home. Shift records place him in town on September 5, 1997. He clocked out at 6 p.m. that evening, hours before the attack. Further investigation reveals he lived on Cedar Street, 5 blocks from the Hutsons. He drove a dark sedan, the kind neighbors might have seen passing through residential streets. He attended the same church Mary sometimes visited, though not regularly. The absence of prior arrests explains why CODIS never flagged him. Robinson had never been fingerprinted, never had his DNA collected. He existed in the gap between suspicion and evidence, invisible to databases designed to catch repeat offenders. Retired investigators watch news coverage with cautious optimism. One detective tells a local television station, "If this pans out, it will restore my faith in persistence." Sheriff Cassidy holds a private briefing with his team. The room fills with tension and anticipation. They have a name, a history, a plausible connection, but they need confirmation. Suspicion is not proof. The plan is simple. Obtain a DNA sample from Robinson without alerting him. Surveillance begins. Officers watch his home, his routines, waiting for the right moment. Next step: confirmation. May 2024, a discarded coffee cup becomes the instrument of justice. Surveillance officers follow Robinson to a convenience store, watch him purchase coffee, wait for him to toss the empty cup in a public trash bin. They retrieve it carefully, sealing it in an evidence bag. The cup travels to the TBI lab in Nashville. Technicians extract DNA from saliva residue on the rim. They run multiple analyses: STR profiling, SNP analysis, Y chromosome mapping. Each test adds layers of certainty. Dr. Ruiz receives the results in her Texas laboratory. She compares Robinson's DNA to the 1997 crime scene sample. The match is absolute. Every marker aligns. Identical Y chromosome sequences tie Robinson to both Mary's assault and James's murder. The probability of error is less than 1 in several billion. She calls Detective Collins first. As a courtesy, his voice breaks when she delivers the news. 27 years of waiting collapse into a single moment. "Are you certain?" he asks. She answers without hesitation, "Yes." The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation briefs the Sullivan County Sheriff's Office. The evidence is airtight. They have their man. Sheriff Cassidy embargoes the news until the legal process advances. Premature publicity could jeopardize prosecution, but word leaks slowly, inevitably. Investigators feel the weight lift. Families receive quiet phone calls. Clara Whitfield, Mary's sister, hears the news from Sheriff Cassidy himself. She cries, not from joy but from exhaustion. "Finally," she whispers, "finally." Summer heat arrived with quiet tension in the sheriff's office. August 2024. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation compiles evidence for the Sullivan County Grand Jury. District Attorney Thomas Greer oversees the presentation, ensuring every detail withstands scrutiny. The brief is meticulous crime scene photographs, forensic charts, Othrum's genetic genealogy report, Witness testimony transcripts from 1997. The 1997 autopsy report on James Hutson is included, documenting the single stab wound that severed his pulmonary artery. Mary's medical records detail the brutality of her assault. The DNA evidence sits at the center, undeniable, irrefutable. Greer explains to his team the legal complications. Tennessee's statute of limitations bars prosecution for the sexual assault of Mary Hutson. The law, written decades ago, did not anticipate DNA technology's ability to reach backward through time. Only the murder charge remains viable. The limitation frustrates Greer. He tells a colleague, "Mary suffered, survived, and died without justice for what he did to her. We can only charge him for James." Law professors begin public debates on Tennessee television. Should DNA evidence override statutes of limitation? Does science demand legal reform? The Hutson case becomes a flashpoint in discussions about justice delayed versus justice denied. On October 3rd, the grand jury convenes. Jurors listen to 2 hours of testimony. They view photographs, review forensic charts, study the family tree that led investigators to George Robinson. The evidence speaks for itself. The indictment is issued. First-degree murder in the death of James Hutson. The decision came in October 7, 2024. A Sullivan County judge signs the arrest warrant. Sheriff Cassidy assigns deputies to execute it. They prepare carefully. Robinson's home is isolated, his behavior unpredictable. Body cameras are activated. Backup units position nearby. At dawn, officers approach Robinson's residence on the outskirts of Kingsport. The house is small, weathered, surrounded by overgrown grass. They knock. No answer. They announce themselves. Voices firm but measured. Still nothing. Minutes stretch. Officers hear movement inside. Then a gunshot. The standoff lasts less than an hour. Negotiators attempt contact. The house remains silent. When officers finally breach the door, they find George Robinson dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. He is 63 years old. On a kitchen table, investigators find a short, handwritten note. The ink is shaky. The words, "Few couldn't face what I did to the boy." It reads, "Nothing more. No apology. No explanation, just a fragment of guilt rendered in cursive." Breaking news interrupts programming across Tennessee. 1997, cold case solved, suspect dead. Television anchors struggle to balance revelation with anticlimax. Justice identified but not delivered. Truth confirmed but not confronted. In Kingsport, the news hits like a second wound. Residents gather in living rooms, watching coverage with mixed emotions. Relief that the killer is identified. Frustration that he escaped accountability. Grief that closure came through death rather than trial. Clara Whitfield watches from her home in North Carolina. She feels something shift inside, not peace, but acknowledgement. The question that haunted her for 27 years finally has an answer. The case was closed, but emotions reopened. The scene is secured by mid-morning. Investigators enter Robinson's home wearing gloves and carrying evidence bags. They move through rooms frozen in time, outdated furniture, yellowed newspapers, the detritus of a solitary life. In a bedroom closet, they find journals, dozens of them, spiral-bound notebooks filled with handwriting that ranges from meticulous to erratic. Detectives spend days reading entries dating back decades. Most pages document mundane frustrations, work grievances, financial stress, complaints about neighbors, but scattered entries reveal darker currents. Robinson writes about anger over perceived rejection, about women who looked down on him, about festering resentment toward people he felt wronged by. One passage, dated August 1997, mentions anger building, like pressure. No additional victims are identified. The journals suggest the Hutson attack was an isolated eruption, not a pattern. Forensic analysts find no evidence linking Robinson to other unsolved cases. His computer yields little, mostly browsing history for news sites and forums. Investigators note he followed coverage of his own crime, reading anniversary articles about the Hutsons, tracking the case through its cold years. The recovered note, "Couldn't face what I did to the boy," becomes the closest thing to a confession. Handwriting analysis confirms it is Robinson's. The phrase implies guilt, acknowledges James's death, admits responsibility, without detailing the crime. Kingsport holds a vigil at the town square. Candles flicker in the October darkness. Clara Whitfield attends, standing among strangers who remember her sister and nephew. She thanks the investigators who never gave up. Forensics continued through the winter. November 2024. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation holds a press conference at the Sullivan County Sheriff's Office. Sheriff Cassidy stands at a podium, flanked by Detective Collins, District Attorney Greer, and Dr. Ruiz via video link. Cassidy speaks first, his tone measured. "After 27 years, We can confirm that George Robinson was responsible for the murder of James Hutson and the assault of Mary Hutson in September 1997. Forensic genetic genealogy provided the breakthrough. Visual slides display DNA match charts, the family tree projection that led to Robinson. The presentation is technical but accessible, designed to educate the public on how science reached across decades. Dr. Ruiz explains Othrum's methodology: whole genome sequencing from degraded samples, genealogical database searches, family tree reconstruction. She emphasizes the cooperation of Robinson's distant relatives, none of whom knew him personally. They helped willingly, she says. They wanted truth as much as anyone. District Attorney Greer addresses the limitations. Due to Tennessee law, we could only pursue the murder charge. The statute of limitations prevented prosecution for the assault on Mary Hutson. This case highlights the need for legal reform when DNA provides irrefutable evidence. Questions from reporters fill the room. How long did the genealogical search take? 6 months. Why wasn't Robinson arrested sooner? The process required careful confirmation. Do other cold cases benefit from this technology? Absolutely. Families of the victims issue a statement read by Clara Whitfield. We do not feel revenge. We feel relief. Truth, not vengeance, is what Mary and James deserved. National media picked up the story. December 2024. The Hutson case explodes across national platforms. Oxygen Network produces a special segment. People magazine features an in-depth article. Forensic science blogs dissect the investigation's technical aspects. The story resonates, a perfect storm of tragedy, persistence, and technological triumph. Officially, the case is marked cleared by exception, the designation used when a suspect is identified but cannot be prosecuted due to death. The file, once open for nearly 3 decades, is finally closed. Analysts write papers on the investigation. Academic journals publish breakdowns of Othrum's whole genome sequencing methodology. The Hutson case becomes a teaching tool in forensic science programs. Students study how a single degraded DNA sample yielded a complete genetic profile, and ultimately, justice. Online forums debate the outcome. Some users express frustration that Robinson escaped trial. Others argue his suicide was its own form of accountability. Most agree the resolution, however imperfect, honors Mary and James. Renewed debates on justice delayed fill editorial pages. Opinion writers argue about statutes of limitation, about whether DNA evidence should override time-based legal protections. The Hutson case is cited repeatedly as proof that technology has outpaced law. Sheriff Cassidy receives letters from across the country, families with their own cold cases. Seeking hope, he forwards many to the TBI's cold case division. The demand for genetic genealogy services surges. As 2025 approaches, the case settles into history, not forgotten, but transformed. From tragedy to testament. 2025 arrived with reflection instead of relief. January 2025. The Sullivan County Sheriff's Office finalizes its official report, a document exceeding 300 pages. Every interview, every test result, every investigative dead end is cataloged. The report becomes part of the public record, available to researchers and journalists. Sheriff Cassidy hosts a private ceremony honoring the investigators who worked the case over nearly 3 decades. Detective Collins receives a commendation, his name added to a plaque recognizing exceptional service. He stands before colleagues, his voice unsteady. Mary and James were never just a case number to me, he says. They were people who deserved answers. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation issues a citation, acknowledging the closure. The case is listed as a precedent for cold case grant renewals. Funding for genetic genealogy partnerships increases. Over 80 unsolved cases across the state are reopened using similar methodologies. The Kingsport Courier runs a front-page headline, 27 years later justice speaks. The article profiles the investigators, the scientists, the family members who never stopped hoping. It acknowledges the bittersweet nature of the resolution truth found, but too late to confront. Clara Whitfield gives an interview from her home. She holds a photograph of Mary and James, taken years before the tragedy. This doesn't bring them back, she says quietly, but it tells the world they mattered, that someone cared enough to keep looking. Across Kingsport, residents feel something shift, not closure, exactly. More like acknowledgement. The town's oldest wound has finally been cleaned and stitched, even if the scar remains. Families gather at the old Hutson home. February 2025. The house on Maple Street stands empty, as it has for years. The property changed hands twice since 1997, but no family stayed long. The history weighs too heavy. Now it sits vacant, windows dark, grass overgrown. Clara Whitfield visits on a cold February morning. She parks at the curb, engine idling, unsure if she can bring herself to approach. Finally, She steps out. The winter air bites. She walks to the front door and leaves flowers on the doorstep, white lilies. Mary's favorite. She touches the doorframe where her sister once stood. Memories flood back: birthday parties, Sunday dinners, James showing off his latest computer project. A neighbor, Mrs. Kellerman, emerges from her house. She is older now, frailer, but she remembers everything. She approaches Clara slowly. I should have said something earlier, Mrs. Kellerman confesses. I saw his car that night. George Robinson's. I saw it parked down the street around 9 o'clock, but I didn't think anything of it then. Only later did I wonder. Clara takes her hand. You couldn't have known. Online, true crime communities call Mrs. Kellerman the woman who almost solved it. Some criticize her silence. Others defend her. The debate misses the point: memory is unreliable, and hindsight is cruel. Historical photographs of the Hutson family are submitted to the Tennessee State Archives. Mary and James join the catalog of lives remembered, stories preserved. The house returns to silence, but the silence feels different now. Not haunted, just quiet. The story moves from fear to remembrance. March 2025. In Nashville, the Tennessee State Legislature convenes hearings on criminal justice reform. Among the proposed bills, an extension of the statute of limitations for sexual assault cases, where DNA evidence exists. Advocates testify before the Judiciary Committee. They reference the Hutson case repeatedly. Mary Hutson was brutally assaulted, one advocate argues. DNA proves who did it, yet the law prevented justice. This cannot stand. Opponents express concerns about retroactive prosecution, about the balance between justice and due process. Legal scholars debate whether DNA evidence alone justifies eliminating time-based protections. District Attorney Greer testifies. He describes the frustration of holding irrefutable evidence while being bound by outdated statutes. Science has given us tools, the law hasn't caught up to, he says. We owe it to victims to close that gap. Protest groups gather outside the Capitol. Some hold signs reading, Mary deserved her day in court. Others advocate for victims' rights reforms. The Hutson case becomes a rallying cry. The bill progresses through committee. If passed, it would extend limitations indefinitely for sexual assault cases with DNA verification. Supporters call it the Mary Hutson Amendment. Clara Whitfield watches the proceedings on television. She feels pride mixed with sorrow. Her sister's suffering might finally change the law, but the change comes too late for Mary herself. By late March, the bill remains in debate. Legislative sessions stretch into summer. The outcome is uncertain, but the conversation has shifted. The Hutson case has forced Tennessee to reckon with the intersection of justice and time. The law may change, but history cannot. At a forensic science conference in Memphis, Dr. Elena Ruiz presents a keynote address. The auditorium fills with law enforcement officers, scientists, prosecutors, and students. Her presentation focuses on the Hutson case as proof of genetic genealogy's transformative power. She displays slides showing the degraded DNA sample from 1997, the whole genome sequencing process, the family tree reconstruction. She explains how Othrum's technology turned fragments into a full genetic profile. We are limited only by the quality of evidence preservation, she tells the audience. If the sample survives, we can identify the source. The case is cataloged under Justice Through Science, a growing category of cold case resolutions enabled by technological innovation. Attendees take notes, inspired by the possibilities. Detective Collins attends the conference. During the Q&A session, he stands and addresses Dr. Ruiz directly. On behalf of the Hutson family and everyone who worked this case, thank you. You gave us what decades of traditional investigation could not. The applause is sustained. Ruiz announces that Othram has reopened over 80 cold cases statewide using similar methods. Several have already yielded identifications. The ripple effect of the Hutson breakthrough extends across Tennessee. A local news anchor covering the conference calls it Tennessee's new era of justice. The phrase captures the optimism: science as redeemer, persistence as virtue. For Mary and James, their names now represent more than tragedy. They symbolize progress. Their case becomes a beacon for families still waiting, still hoping that time has not erased the possibility of answers. For the Hutsons, their names live on in progress. May 2025. May 2025. Retired Detective Ray Collins sits in his study surrounded by boxes of case files he kept after leaving the force. He has been invited to participate in a documentary about cold case breakthroughs. A film crew sets up cameras as he sorts through old interview transcripts, crime scene photographs, evidence logs. He revisits his original notes from 1997. The handwriting is younger, more confident. He reads aloud for the camera: suspect unknown, no forced entry. Victim new attacker. The words feel prophetic now. validated by decades of waiting. The interviewer asks about missed opportunities. Collins pauses, choosing words carefully. We did everything we could with the tools we had, but there's one thing that haunts me. He pulls a yellowed evidence log from 1997. Buried in the witness interview section is a single mention of George Robinson's name. A neighbor had casually mentioned seeing his car in the area that evening. The notation is brief, dismissed at the time because Robinson had no criminal record and no apparent connection to the family. We looked at him briefly, Collins admits, but without evidence, without DNA matches, we moved on. His name was there all along, buried in the file. Time. He had hidden the answer in plain sight. The revelation stirs public reaction. Online forums dissect the near miss. Some criticize the original investigation. Others defend it, pointing out that hindsight distorts judgment. The debate reflects a universal truth. Police work is imperfect, constrained by the moment's limitations. Collins feels the weight of the irony but does not dwell on guilt. We found him eventually, he says. That's what matters. Public stirs at the irony. June 2025. The Kingsport Courthouse, a brick building dating to the 1950s, becomes the site of a community memorial ceremony. The event is organized by Clara Whitfield and supported by local officials. Families of crime victims from across Tennessee are invited to attend. Sheriff Cassidy speaks first. He acknowledges the decades of pain carried by the Whitfield family and expresses gratitude to the community for never forgetting. Mary and James were not just names in a file. They were neighbors, family, friends. Today we honor their memory and the justice that finally arrived. A memorial plaque is unveiled near the courthouse steps. Bronze letters spell out the names of Mary and James Hutson, along with the dates of their deaths. Beneath, an inscription reads, "In memory of lives lost and truth rediscovered. May their story remind us that justice, though delayed, is never denied." Clara stands before the crowd, her voice steady despite the emotion behind it. She holds letters written by Mary years before the tragedy, simple correspondences about everyday life, plans for James's future, hopes for grandchildren she would never meet. "My sister was a mentor to many," Clara says. "She believed in kindness, in helping others." George Robinson's sister was one of the people Mary tried to help years before the attack. That connection makes this even more painful. Betrayal wrapped in tragedy. The crowd listens in silence. The revelation that Mary once mentored Robinson's sister adds a layer of cruel irony to the story. Trust violated, kindness repaid with violence. Crowds cry quietly. Healing feels tangible but incomplete. Sunset casts the courthouse in gold. July 2025. In a quiet cemetery outside Kingsport, Detective Ray Collins stands before two graves. The headstones are simple: Mary Hutson, beloved mother and sister; James Hutson, cherished son. Flowers left by visitors dot the grass around them. Collins comes alone, without ceremony. He carries a folder containing the final case report. He does not speak aloud, but his thoughts are full. He remembers the first time he stood in the Hutson home, the weight of unsolved questions pressing against his chest. He remembers Mary's hollow eyes in the hospital. He remembers James's photograph pinned above his desk for 27 years. He places a small object at the base of James's headstone, a wooden cross recovered from the 1997 crime scene. It had been kept as evidence, catalogued, and stored. Now, with the case closed, it is returned, a symbol of faith, of suffering, of endurance. In his personal journal, Collins writes his final reflections. Justice is not always swift, it is not always satisfying, but it is necessary. Mary and James waited longer than anyone should, but they were not forgotten. That matters. A local podcast revisits the case's timeline for new audiences. The host interviews forensic experts, family members, community leaders. The episodes attract thousands of listeners, many hearing the story for the first time. The case becomes a teaching moment about perseverance and the evolution of forensic science. Collins drives home as the sun sets. He feels lighter, as if a burden carried for decades has finally been set down. And yet, the silence now feels different, peaceful. August 2025. The story reaches its final chapter, not with a dramatic revelation, but with quiet resolution. In laboratories across Tennessee, evidence from other cold cases is being processed. DNA samples are sequenced. Family trees are constructed. Investigators work late into the night, driven by the precedent set by the Hutson case. At Othram Labs in Texas, Dr. Ruiz reviews two new cases recently solved using genetic genealogy. Both are decades old. Both were considered unsolvable. The methods refined during the Hutson investigation made these breakthroughs possible. She announces the successes at a press conference, acknowledging the Hutson family by name. Every case we solve honors the victims who came before. Mary and James Hutson paved the way for others to receive justice. In Kingsport, life continues. The house on Maple Street remains empty, a monument to memory. Neighbors still tell the story to newcomers, explaining the history woven into their town's fabric. The case is no longer a source of fear, but a testament to patience and progress. National outlets publish retrospectives. Headlines read, "Tennessee Cold Case, a testament to patience and progress." The articles praise the collaboration between local law enforcement, state agencies, and private laboratories. The Hutson case becomes a model for how communities and technology can work together. The official file, stamped "cleared by exception," rests in an archive room at the Sullivan County Sheriff's Office. It sits among hundreds of other cases, but it occupies a unique place, a story of persistence rewarded, of truth reclaimed from time's erasure. File stamped "cleared by exception." Night falls over Kingsport. Streetlights flicker on along quiet roads. Crickets resume their evening chorus, the same sound that filled the air on September 5, 1997. The town sleeps peacefully, carrying its history with dignity. The Hutson mailbox, long unused, sways gently in a warm Tennessee breeze. Paint peels from its surface, weather-worn by nearly 3 decades. No letters arrive. No one lives at the address anymore. But the mailbox remains, a small landmark in a neighborhood that remembers. Across town, Clara Whitfield sits in her living room, photographs of Mary and James spread across the coffee table. She has spent the evening organizing them for a family scrapbook, a project she has delayed for years. Now, with the case resolved, she feels ready to remember, without the weight of unanswered questions. She selects a photograph of Mary and James at the beach, smiling in summer sunlight. James holds up a seashell, grinning. Mary's arm wraps around his shoulder. The image captures a moment of pure joy, untouched by the violence that would come. Clara places the photograph at the front of the scrapbook. Beneath it, she writes, "Forever loved, never forgotten, justice found." In laboratories and courtrooms, in newsrooms and podcasts, the Hutson story continues to resonate. It becomes part of the larger narrative about how society confronts its darkest moments, about how science and humanity intersect, about how persistence, even across decades, can yield truth. Justice delayed is not justice denied. The screen fades to black, but the story endures a reminder that even time cannot erase the pursuit of truth, and that every victim deserves to be remembered, honored, and avenged by the patient work of those who refuse to forget.